Hello, folks online. Hello, people in person. Thank you so much for coming. I think we're going to start out with some brief welcome remarks from Dean Roberts.
Good afternoon. I have to scooch in. Good afternoon. I am Lynn Roberts. I'm the Associate Dean of Student Affairs and Alumni Relations here at the CUNY Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. I welcome you to our fourth annual recognition of CUNY Disability Awareness Month. And we have several events. This is our first panel that will focus on ADHD. We have several experts on this, and who will be sharing both their perspectives as providers of care and support, as students and people with lived experience. So stay tuned. You're in for, I think, a very informative discussion about what we consider one of our most significant disability issues that many of our students grapple with. So we're all here to learn and share and do better at what we do in supporting them. So I'm going to turn things over to Sarah Ingram, who has really been the mastermind and coordinator behind this series of events, and she'll also share what we have coming up after today's panel. So again, welcome. We're glad you're here in person and online.
Thanks so much, Dean Roberts, and thank you again for all coming here in person. I think you can hear me. I have this fancy little lapel mic, so I'm just going to put this one down for a second. But hi, everybody. So I am Sarah Ingram, the Director of the Office of Accessibility Services. Thank you again, Dean Roberts, for the warm welcome. I just want to talk just briefly a little bit about how and why we came up with this panel and to focus on ADHD. And let me just put it this way. More than a few of our students have ADHD. And in working closely with them in my role, I realized that not only was I was able to help provide accommodations for them via their provider letters and working with them and their professors, but then it was like questions kept coming up, but isn't there more? Like, isn't there more than just these accommodations that can be done? And I'm like, oh. And then in conversation with my colleague, Sherry Adams, it was like, wait, well, we have a lot of similar experiences of we don't know what we can provide to students because we're not the experts in this field, but we can help get connected to those experts in this field. So anyways, I'm grateful that you all are here, and here's how we're going to do this today. Short and sweet. I'm going to just have the panelists introduce themselves. Then I'm going to ask a bunch of questions. We'll take questions from you in person. Then we'll take questions online, and then we'll eat for the people who are here. Or you guys are maybe eating. I don't know. Anyway, so first, let me have the panelists introduce themselves. So I'll start with you, Yvonne.
So hi, I'm Yvonne. Pronoun. Oh.
Yes.
Oh, we need a mic. Okay, we're fancy today. Okay, so I'm Yvonne. Pronouns are she, her. I am a fourth-year doctoral student here at SPH and also someone who is an ADHDer. So yeah, happy to be here and to share my experience with you all.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Major. I'm a first-year PhD student in the EPI department. I am a kind of late in life diagnosed ADHDer, so I hope I can also share some of those experiences accessing disability services for the first time.
Hey everyone, my name is Bree Scalaro. Pronouns are they. I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I'm also a third-year doctoral student at the CUNY Graduate Center. And I'm also a field advisor at the Silberman School of Social Work in the MSW program.
And I failed to mention that we actually have another panelist who's on Zoom. So Sally, would you please introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. My name is Sally Izquierdo. I'm a board certified and licensed.
Sally is muted.
No, we just can't.
We can't hear her. Oh, she is not muted.
Oh, I think we don't have sound. It says, I'm not hearing anything, turn volume up.
Shall I continue?
technical difficulties?
Yeah. Oh, no.
Oh. Sally, let's have you speak again.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yay!
Wonderful. So starting again, my name is Sally Izquierdo. I'm a board certified and licensed behavior analyst and psychologist. I have over 30 years of clinical experience providing support to individuals with developmental disabilities, families, professionals in homes, schools, and in the community. Currently, I work as the clinical training manager in the psychology department at Queens College. I direct the applied behavior analysis graduate programs and Queens College Project REACH. Project REACH stands for Resources and Education on Autism as CUNY's hallmark. It's a university-wide program created to enhance CUNY's capacity to support its growing population of neurodivergent students and to educate others about neurodiversity.
Great, thank you so much. So I think we're going to start with a couple questions of our school public health students. So question to both Yvonne and Jen. If there's one thing you want people to know about ADHD, what's that one thing?
I think my first thought is we're not lazy. I think that's a big misconception about people who have ADHD is that because we have executive dysfunction, I guess is the proper term for it, it's harder for us to kind of get organized. And so sometimes that can manifest as like being late on deadlines or being late generally, or kind of having this paralysis of like just sitting and your mind going, but you're just like sitting, not able to like do anything. And that can manifest as like people seeing it as laziness. And so I think for me, that's like the biggest misconception is that ADHDers are lazy. I don't know.
I guess for me, I would just say it can look very different. And I guess getting to what Yvonne said, some things may come across as lazy, I think, and also the flip side, it may look on the surface like people are doing okay. You know, I always got really excellent grades, but that came through a lot of difficulty and maybe not caring so well for myself or finding that balance, because it's a condition of extremes. You can have a really powerful brain, but you know, that might mean you spend an entire day working on an assignment that you're passionate about and you haven't really moved, you haven't eaten. And the normal day is you don't drink water until 4 p.m. because you're ignoring reminders on your phone. And so, yeah, it's sort of it's kind of a constant battle with your own brain. And I think that can kind of get missed. And it's why a lot of women and girls, I think, have been missed for quite a long time.
Thank you both. And sort of a follow-up question. Did you have an aha, so that explains it moment for yourself?
Like when I got diagnosed?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. I'm also late diagnosis. I didn't actually get diagnosed until I started here at SPH, thanks to Sherry. And so, yeah, I had like a sense of like relief of like, oh, wow, like this explains a lot of my experience. And then also a sense of like mourning for the person I could have been if I was diagnosed earlier. And I think that's a very, from what I've learned, is a very common experience with people who are late diagnosed, is the idea that like, oh, who could I have become if I had known all of this information? So I think it's kind of a twofold of like a sense of relief and also almost like a sadness. At least that's how I felt it.
For me, something, I guess, in school, I had always told people, you know, I get excellent grades, I do well in school, but it's because I work so hard to the detriment of, you know, my personal well-being, relationships. But what I mean by that is I cannot take notes like many people do. I would sit in lectures and I would have to write word for word what the professors were saying. I would have notebooks full. If I'm taking notes from a textbook, entire notebooks would just be full, highlighted everything because I don't know what's important. And I would be sitting, I would look over at people who every once in a while they would, write down a bullet point, and I would just be like, how would you remember? Like, how is that going to be useful for you? And so, yeah, I think that it became very clear why that was. And when I hear that, verbal working memory and being able to retain information, that sort of made sense. So now I tell people, like, please do not tell me verbal information. I will not feed your cat correctly. Like, they will be, the recent experience, like, double fed what they should have been fed. And my roommate at the time was like, oh no, she had said this. Like, what?
Thank you. Thank you both. And to Sally online, you've been doing this work for a little while now, and I'm wondering if you can tell us just a little bit about how this work has changed for clinicians over time since you began to present day.
Sure. I think, what comes to mind when you ask that question is that our approach is, I think, both broader and more specific at the same time. I feel like when I started, ADHD was more of a childhood disorder, not something we continued to talk about as individuals became adults. I was often, and it's often one of the most common co-occurring disorders. So I often saw it in combination with autism or other developmental disabilities, and occasionally alone, but usually in children and usually in boys. And so now we don't just stop talking about ADHD as individuals grow up, and we acknowledge that it may look differently in girls, as some of our panelists have described. We see individuals with ADHD who are adults being diagnosed for the first time as adults. We can see how can be a standalone as a diagnosis, and co-occurring things like anxiety and depression. So this is like the broader lens. And I think the other thing that has changed is our perspective. We take a much more strengths-based perspective, more than we ever have. So rather than focus on the struggle, we focus on individual strengths and build off of those to teach helpful skills, strategies, and to teach individuals to understand their ADHD and how to work with it to accomplish their goals. We talk more about specific executive functioning skills and how to teach them, not just how to be calm and pay attention. I think those are the biggest things that I notice.
That's really significant. It's really big changes, and especially the distinctions just on like children and comorbidity co-diagnosis. And yeah, that's super interesting. Great, I want to turn it over to you. Can you talk a little bit about your approach to working with clients with ADHD and how you bring your lived experience to your clinical work and, frankly, your teaching too?
Mm-hmm. My approach to ADHD with my clients, first and foremost, is a stance of an affirmative stance. I believe my clients' experience of their life, and I center them in the narrative of their experience, as opposed to viewing them as a problem to be solved or fixed. And I have found that just that stance alone can be life-changing for someone who's never been taken seriously or has been labeled as lazy or whatever negative label has been slapped on them. I recognize with my patients as well that we are in a system that is not designed for us, as also someone who identifies as having ADHD and neurodivergent. And that generates frustration and anger. And actually living in that system, we also internalize that self-doubt. But it wasn't born within us. It was placed in us by society. That's very powerful, and I wanted to share that with you. For so many folks with ADHD and other conditions and disabilities, they're not believed and taken seriously. And I make my therapeutic space a place where I believe my client. Because what better stance than to generate trust and humanness. From a clinical perspective, ADHD can look so many different ways. It's not only time management and getting to where you need to be on time, but it does include that. A lot of ADHD is the internal experience, especially for folks who have been socialized as female. We're taught to keep that inside. We might not exhibit symptoms or behaviors in the same way that folks socialized as male have been allowed to navigate that space. So a lot of the work I do is working with that crippling self-doubt, that imposter syndrome, the way you respond to yourself with kindness and compassion for, once again, forgetting your keys, or once again, feeling like you cannot complete the most simplest of tasks, or you don't remember something very important your friend shared, you don't remember it. So that's a little bit about how I approach that. And my lived experience, I understand what that feels like in a way that someone who just reads about ADHD or depression or anxiety in a textbook, honestly, I think could never understand. And I recognize my patients' experiences might be different, but my own experience provides a fantastic starting point to have a conversation, to out myself if appropriate, to generate a mutual understanding of my experience, and maybe share some tools that I have found to be helpful. Again, recognizing that I have to be careful with my own assumptions and biases because my experience is not theirs. So I think so much can be gained when you work with someone who has that lived experience, and that goes beyond ADHD.
Thank you for that. I think I'm hearing from both of you, well, and everyone actually, that really you're coming from the perspective of the social model of disability as opposed to that medical model, that it's not the problem of the individual, it's the problem that's being imposed on you. Thank you so much. And I'm going to go back to Sally with a question. Can you talk a little bit about the supports that you've developed for neurodivergent CUNY students and faculty?
Sure. As I said before, I direct Queens College Project Reach, which is again a CUNY-wide program on a couple of our CUNY campuses. At Queens College, we started in the spring of 2021 with individual mentorship. So our graduate students of applied behavior analysis provide individualized support to neurodivergent CUNY students. And they do that under the supervision of a board certified and licensed behavior analyst. The support is in the context of peer mentorship with a strengths-based perspective. So they work together to identify goals and objectives that are really important to the student themselves. And then they set up, a plan to help the individual to learn that skill or to accomplish what they intend to accomplish that semester. It might be access to personal campus or other resources. They might, practice skills, monitor their progress, and make modifications. They help with college transition, self-advocacy, time management, career readiness, socialization, really anything that the individual identifies as something of need. So that's our individual mentorship. And then we created 2 skills groups. And we offer an executive functioning skills group focused on skills such as time management, self-monitoring, organization, communication, self-advocacy. Self-advocacy is really interwoven into everything that we do, breaking things down, and even things like making time for leisure. We also offer an acceptance and commitment therapy group, focusing on mindfulness, identifying values, dealing with thoughts and anxiety, avoidance, taking committed action. And then in addition to that, we created a 2-part faculty workshop on neurodiversity and what that might look like in the classroom and sort of removing barriers for students. And on the heels of that, we developed a faculty resource hub on the Teams platform. And we most recently launched a neurodivergent student resource hub also on the Teams platform to provide resources and helpful information for students to help them navigate school and the semester and so forth. So we've kind of continued to just build on what we offer to reach more students, to reach a growing diversity of students, and to help our faculty and staff sort of keep up and understand what they can do and how they can improve their practices as well to better support students.
Great, thanks for explaining all that. And unfortunately, we do not have Project Reach here at School of Public Health, but I love what you're doing out there at Queens. And to Jen, let's go back to our School of Public Health students. Can you talk a little bit about your experience registering with the Office of Accessibility here and how you expect to use those supports in your PhD studies?
Yeah, it's a good question. For me, it was a really big deal to even register for this. I went back and forth in my mind for weeks, if not maybe a month or two, because when I got diagnosed, like formal confirmation through psychological testing, it was really kind of for my own confirmation and related to medications and verifying that was appropriate. And I'd gone so long in school. I have 2 master's degrees. I've always done well. There was this, so when it was first raised, like, oh, would you like to, use this to request accommodations? Honestly, it wasn't something that I thought about at all. I wasn't really in that space. But, thinking about what I have sacrificed in, doing well in school to date and how it doesn't have to be that way. I ultimately, decided to register. And even when I registered, I was like, well, like the classes, will I go through with, asking for accommodations? And so that's still a little bit of, things I toss around in my mind and when it makes sense. But I finally, I just, pushed the button and said, reached out, had a call with Sarah, which was really helpful. And yeah, so now I'm sort of figuring out how and when, like what's the best process for using the accommodations, because I think it's not quite as easy as just requesting accommodations. It requires a sort of time management, planning, executive functioning almost to even be able to speak with the faculty to ask for, any type of accommodation, especially if it's not like a standard structured class with, in-person exams and asking for more time or quiet space. I think that's one thing. But when you have maybe at the graduate and PhD level, just the types of assignments, it requires sort of, how and what am I able to commit to by a certain period of time, that it's actually quite challenging to figure out how to use. But the office has been great. It was really supportive, and I've seen even through this panel that there's a desire to really support and find more resources for students with ADHD. So yeah, I really appreciate that.
Hey, thanks for the plug. Woohoo! No, but I think a couple of things that you touched on, I think is important, is that I think students do come with the idea of like, well, I didn't get this before, so no, I don't necessarily need it, even if I do have this diagnosis. Or the reverse. I had this in undergrad, but now, this is graduate school. I got to buck up and deal. Like, and so I've seen that pattern of sort of both of those things. But obviously there's no wrong path, like whatever, however people come to that decision for themselves. And I think another thing too is, we don't have a list of accommodations that we say, hey, pick and choose. It's like, this is a conversation between you and the person that you're working with who is a professional in their field. They're going to talk to you, you're going to talk to them. And that's something that I think there's no cookie cutter explanation. There may be similar accommodations that students are getting across the board, but for the reasons and how the students are going to use them and how they're going to work with their professors, if the professors are the ones doing the implementation, are really different. So anyways, that's my other plug. But thank you for that. And Yvonne, I want to turn to you. I understand that you're looking to start to move into neurodivergent spaces, and I just wanted to ask what that looks like for you.
Like being intentional about moving.
Being intentional, exactly.
Yeah. A lot of it is that I'm usually the only person of color in a space that's for neurodivergent people. And so it's kind of like being as visible as possible. I see that as a responsibility that I have, unfortunately. It's not one that I necessarily want to carry, but I feel like it is part of my responsibility as somebody who has the privilege to get formally diagnosed, which I know is out of the scope for a lot of people, particularly people who, as we all know in public health, don't have care or are not covered by insurance that would cover being diagnosed. And so I think for me, being intentional about being part of spaces is for that visibility. As being a person of color, a woman, and being in a space that's neurodivergent. So other people who look like me or have similar experiences that I do can say like, oh, like their experience is very similar to mine. Like maybe I should find out more about being ADHD or, you know, something like that. So I feel like it's a responsibility that I have as somebody who's privileged enough. And fortunately, it's a privilege to have been diagnosed formally. And then I also just like meeting other neurodivergent people. I feel very at home and like familial because I don't have to explain myself. Like it's very easy to over-explain things because, you know, I don't want to be misunderstood, and I tend to be misunderstood by neurotypical people. But with other neurodivergent people, I don't have to explain myself. Like it feels like, yes, I understand you. Like you don't have to say anything more. And I'm like, okay, I feel at home. So those are probably the two kind of main reasons why I'm very intentional about putting myself out there in neurodivergent spaces.
Great, thank you. This is a good segue into my next question for the two of you, which is, does your work in public health, like in your actual work or your studies and your intention for your doctoral studies, contribute in any way to having ADHD, identifying as an ADHDer, et cetera?
So my research is not. My research, if you've met me at all, even for a little bit, is about food. I love talking about food. That is my special interest. That's where I hyper focus. Like talking about food access is like really like my thing. But in talking with Bree and Jen earlier, I do realize that my experience as an ADHDer does come into the classroom as an adjunct professor here at SPH and also at a high school in Queens. And I am very explicit about my room and classroom being neurodivergent friendly. It's in my syllabus, and I used to say on the first day, like, this is a neurodivergent space. It's friendly to you all if you need to get up, if you need to walk around, if you need a fidget, if you need to draw or whatever for you to focus, I am open to that. I also share that I am an ADHDer on the very first day in the classroom so that there's like the comfortability of somebody maybe who wants to ask for accommodations but feels uncomfortable about it. And I tell them very straight up, like, I probably will forget something. Like, do not feel bad about reminding me. If you don't hear from me in 2 days, send me another email because it's probably gotten lost in this abyss of my email, or I read it, didn't flag it, and now it's like gone from my brain. So I try to be like very humanistic about my approach. I'm like, I'm a human, you're a human, we're here in this space to learn from each other, and we all come with different experiences. And so how do we kind of create a space that is as much as possible safe so that we can all learn? So I guess that's kind of my way I bring it into my work, I guess.
Cool, thank you.
So I work for a medical humanitarian organization called International Medical Corps as a technical advisor for research and monitoring and evaluation. And in hindsight, I think it makes perfect sense how I ended up in this kind of position, which I want to stay in. I don't really see myself leaving. So I think on the one hand, it comes from a kind of social justice sensitivity that I've always had, which I think is something that's also just kind of like your brain wiring. I mean, I was so sensitive as a child. I would cry when our Christmas trees died. And so my mom had to start buying plastic trees because I would cry when the pine needles fell off. And it's that, you know, the intense emotions, the intense empathy. And then I think it just happened to be a really good fit in terms of my, like, how I work. It's I mean, it's stimulating kind of environment. And it's never boring. It's always changing. I working in a more kind of generalist position. I'm not focused on, you know, one technical area. I'm not, you know, in the medical team. I'm not in the nutrition team, but I actually work with all of them. And I get to do really cool research and support really important work that's meaningful. And so I think it's you know, my like passions for it show through, and it's also being able to connect the dot between different kind of technical fields that, you know, I get to keep learning, that never stops. And I think that also applies to what kind of my research interests are. I would say at the intersection separately, and I like the intersection of infectious disease, mental health, and nutrition, and exploring the kind of connections and interlinkages between them through things like the microbiome is something that I want to explore more, because I think the way my brain works, I want to find the connections, I want to make sense of things and find the pathways. So yeah, I think I always thought it's just my personality, but it's, you know, personality, brain wiring, ADHD, it kind of all makes sense in the end.
Thank you both. I think I want to just do a final question to all of you, and maybe we'll start with you, Bree. What skills building or resources would you recommend for people new to an ADHD diagnosis, or people who just want to learn more?
There are so many ways to answer your question about skills and resources, about learning ADHD, becoming diagnosed, showing up to yourself with more compassion. I would really direct folks to, honestly, learning how to identify the moments when you are not feeling so compassionate with yourself, and practicing generating that alternate perspective in how you respond to yourself, how you're labeling yourself, what you're saying to yourself, how you're judging yourself. And there are a lot of tools that can support growing that ability to do so, that self-reflective process. Well, personally, in my own life, one of the most powerful tools has been to practice meditation. And meditation is not about sitting silently and your brain clears out. It's a chaotic space. But my brain is constantly a chaotic space in my life. To come back to the audio I'm listening to again and again, to come back from my mind once again wandering off, and to respond to myself with compassion, and to not say, man, I can't follow along. Here I am again. I'm a social worker. I should be beyond this. I can't lose focus. Meditation has helped me to build that skill of self-compassion toward myself. And there are a lot of great apps and tools to be able to do so. And some folks try meditation and it really doesn't work for them, and that's okay. And like I said earlier, I have skills that have helped me, and that might not help you, but it could provide some starting ground And perhaps the idea I share with you makes you think of something else that would work for you better. Right? So you can even start with listening to music, your favorite song. And when your mind wanders off, come back to the music and just focus in the present. It could look like noticing when your mind wanders off and you just label that. This is my little monkey mind. He's running around today, and coming back to the present moment, to what your partner or your professor is sharing, to what your fingers experience in your hands or your feet on the ground, grounding yourself back in that present. And I would really echo what Dr. Sally was saying as well about acceptance and commitment therapy, a lot of great tools that can support you in learning how to do that. Providers that can help you learn the tools that could support you. And I also want to stress the importance of, when accessible, the neuropsych evaluation. Getting a concrete answer that this is your experience, even if you know it, is one of the most validating experiences I've felt. So I will pause there. I could go on and on, but I will not. Thank you.
Thank you. Sally, you wanna take this one too?
Yeah, I'll take this one, but I don't know that I could add much more to what she just said. I thought that was really like perfect advice. Beautifully said. What I would add, and it's probably a repetition, is just to take an inventory of your own strengths, right? I think that individuals may focus on all the areas where they're falling short, and all the areas in which they differ from others, even from others with ADHD, right? And recognizing that your ADHD may not look like somebody else's ADHD. Your experience may be different from somebody else's experience. It's likely to be different, right? Based on all your different experiences and history and you as an individual. So taking an inventory of your own strengths, your own areas of need, your own executive functioning strengths and areas of need, and your values, right? And again, this crosses over into acceptance and commitment therapy. Again, identifying your values, what's important to you, and what do you need. So when you do perhaps seek out the assistance of a professional, you come to the table with all of that about yourself, and you can take that individualized approach to your own ADHD and help others to see you as an individual as well. And I think that's one of the best things that you can do for yourself.
Great, thanks.
Can you repeat the question? So
Yes.
I already forgot. Yay, ADHD.
Skills building or resources you'd recommend to anybody who is new to the diagnosis, or I guess just anybody who's interested in learning more?
I know, again, like privilege, but therapy has been really helpful to me. Talking to somebody that's not within like my world has been really helpful. Having somebody else validate my experiences, that one is a professional and two is not like my partner or my mom who's like, oh yeah, you're wonderful, right? Like they kind of have to say that, but your therapist doesn't. So like going to therapy and being in therapy regularly has really helped me in kind of validating my experience, and then also providing that kind of acceptance and strength-based approach that Dr. Sally and Bree have been talking about, of like combating the imposter syndrome and combating that self-doubt, especially when you're a doctoral student, when especially in a world that's not really meant for you to be belonging in. And so you're constantly having to battle both external voices and your internal voices telling you that you don't belong. So I think therapy has been really helpful in kind of building up tools to be able to combat particularly those internal voices telling me that I don't belong. So I would say therapy if you have access to it. And again, finding a neurodivergent group of friends community has been really helpful too, of being able to kind of again have that feedback of like, no, you're doing great kind of situation.
I mean, I guess I'm still exploring tools, resources myself, but in terms of kind of apps and things that I'm trying to use regularly. Things like Speechify, I found is helpful. You can like listen and read along. It also helps me to multitask, so I don't have to sit there and, you know, just read through the materials. I'm trying to be regularly using this app called Timeo or Timeo. That is both Speechify and this other app are it's kind of marketed around neurodivergent people. And I like this app because it has a widget that is really more in your face about, you know, like take a break, drink some water, like go for a walk, that I find I really need because both in school and work, I'm really lucky in the sense that I'm really passionate about these things that I'm doing, but it also really means that I can just go into this zone where it's not a healthy place at all. And so I would echo therapy helped kind of just like bring my attention to that. Like, this is not a good space. Like, just because there's no anxiety, no depression, none of that, it doesn't mean like you're in a healthy place. The fact that it's so hard to like just go make a meal because you're thinking about, oh, but I just thought of this and I need to go like type it out, otherwise I'm going to forget. That's not a good space. But recognizing that therapy can be pretty inaccessible. I think because my therapist doesn't really focus on ADHD, I've actually found more use from, more like coaches and kind of like the videos that are out there. There's a lot of like public material and people talking about what they're experiencing and how they have gone about it. And I've actually found very useful the kind of tips and just the things that they're saying it's like, okay, it's not just me that's dealing with this. And it kind of brings your attention to things that are, challenges that you like maybe are experiencing, but don't even have words for it. And they kind of, put it out there concretely in a way that, I found more helpful than any like books necessarily, or even, therapy has been. But yeah, I think there's a lot more information out there now that people can access for low cost.
Great, thank you. Speaking of Speechify, this is not necessarily a plug for this app, but I'm going to follow up with a resource list, and in looking at Speechify, it sounds like you can actually have Snoop Dogg read your public health homework back to you or whatever. So it's like
you can.
Yeah,
Snoop Dogg can talk to you about case control studies, right, and survival analysis, anything you want.
Excellent. So I want to open up to the panelists to ask questions of each other before we go to audience questions, if you have, including Sally. Nope. Okay. I know. Oh, sorry. Pop question. Yeah.
I guess I know Yvonne will be like talking separately, but I would be curious your experience with also being a late in life diagnosed ADHD, or how did you kind of come to this moment?
Yeah. So my journey getting diagnosed is actually really interesting. I have a close friend of mine who was diagnosed, and she was talking about her experience, and I was like, hey, that sounds like me. Like, do I have ADHD? Like, what? And so that was in 2020, and I connected with Jeanette, who was the predecessor to Sarah and Sherry, and I was like, maybe I should go get diagnosed. And I will say, getting diagnosed is not an ADHD friendly process in any way, shape, or form. There's too many steps, way too much paperwork to be able to manage as somebody who has ADHD, but finally got there, and And yeah, being, you know, in my mid-30s and getting diagnosed, one I found was not actually as uncommon as I thought it was, particularly as somebody who's female. But also, again, like I mentioned before, it was kind of a relief and the mourning process all at the same time. And it really drove me to seek therapy because I felt like I really needed to figure out, like, okay, I have this diagnosis now. I've always been this way, but the coping mechanisms that I have been using, as you've mentioned before, are not healthy in any way, shape, or form. Like the thing around like forgetting to eat is a huge thing for me, which is ironic given that my research is on food access. So like I had to be okay with like relying on other people for those things. So like my partner's very good at reminding me to have lunch when I'm kind of like in this hyper-focused mode. And it's been a lot of trial and error to figure out kind of what works after having lived, you know, 30 plus years with the absolute no knowledge that ADHD was even like a thing that I could have or be. And so I think it's been, and I'm still like in the process, right? I'm not going to undo 30 years of unhealthy coping in 4 years, but it's definitely been an opportunity for me to give myself grace when I mess up or I miss something or I misunderstand somebody or I zone out when my partner's talking to me and I have to be like, I'm so sorry. I totally like spaced out. What were you saying? And like, it also allows for people to also give you that grace because they know it's not intentional, like you're not meaning to be rude or, you know, to be thoughtless. It's really just the way that our brains are wired. And so it just kind of allows, again, for that humanization of us as individuals. So I'm still in a learning process, especially now as I move from like classroom work, which is very structured, very like deadline heavy, which I do really well under, moving into dissertation space, which is very much self-motivated, very much like I have to be the one driving it. And so I'm working on that with my therapist now. Like, how do I self-motivate? How do I keep making sure that I'm on time when the deadlines are not real, right? I'm making these up. So, you know, it's a constant learning, constant fluctuations. But yeah, that's my very long-winded thing. ADHDers love to talk, so.
Yay. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, so if no questions for panelists for each other, anybody? Sure, yeah, we can take questions from the chat first, or yeah, go for it. Dean Roberts.
First and foremost, thank you for this wonderful panel. I have a question, since many of us here, I think online and also in this space, are people who interact with students on a regular basis, either in the classroom or in some form of providing student services. And I loved what you said, Yvonne, about how you start your semester and what you have in your syllabus. But how can those who don't identify as ADHDers really invite necessarily, but to just feel supported and comfortable if we aren't aware of what they're experiencing as ADHDers? Do you understand my question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think whether or not I disclose that I'm ADHD or neurodivergent, I think that like deepens my understanding of people. But I think being just very explicit that the classroom that I'm holding and facilitating is neurodivergent friendly, and putting it in the syllabus, but also verbally saying it on the first day, I think shifts the culture of the classroom just a tiny bit so that people feel comfortable coming to you and saying like, okay, you know, we get the accommodations from Sarah. We know like this person gets 1.5 time on a quiz or whatever, but I think it opens the door for somebody to say like, oh, I might need more than that. And they feel like you're able to be approachable and say, okay, well, this person was very explicit in saying that this is neurodivergent friendly. They're safe enough for me to say, I'm dealing with this and I you know, I want to do well. So I think just being explicit about it is really helpful. I just go deeper because I have a very like, you know, deep experience.
Some of us might, I hope people can still hear me, but people might not feel they have the right language or, you know, the way to make that invitation that you might have because of your direct experience.
Yeah.
You know, and without singling people out, but also making, you know, and also even on one-on-one, I'm thinking of folks who are providing advice and or counseling and support that is even financial aid or whatever it is. These are all interactions, and there could be something going on with someone that they're not really mindful of, and they want to feel they're making people feel comfortable and feel as acknowledged for their neurodivergence. You know,
yeah.
Also, maybe on both sides too, be among our staff and instructors as well.
Yeah.
I was just clarifying my earlier question about just how to create the environment for those who have ADHD to feel more supported by the staff, the instructors, anyone who's interacting with them within the school environment.
Yeah, I think generally I would say just being explicit about saying you're neurodivergent friendly space, whether it's a classroom or you as an individual. Language, I tend to just, I do pull from my own experience about the language that I'm using, but I tend to also think about, okay, what would create a space that's you know, going to support health and well-being, especially as public health people. So I say, feel free to eat in the class if you're hungry, especially because usually when I teach, it's from like 6 to 8. And so it's kind of in the evening and people are maybe like coming from work. So I don't even just focus it on ADHDers, but I just focus on like the well-being of the classroom. So I always take breaks. I never lecture for 2.5 hours. Like one, I just could not do that. Like it's tiring, but I also always know that I need to take a break to go to the bathroom or do whatever. And I'm sure students do too. So it benefits ADHDers and neurodivergent people, but I think it benefits everyone when we all get to take kind of a brain break. So thinking about it like that too is like, yes, we're focusing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I'm digging more into that because my goal is to teach. And so I really want to be able to kind of include that universal design into my classrooms, but definitely being thoughtful about, okay, what would I need as a student, and then putting that into practice. And then also allowing for feedback from students, like really saying like, oh, I wish we had a longer break so I can go grab dinner or something. Then I'd be like, okay, like let's try that and see if it works. So being really flexible about how the classroom is structured has also been really helpful too.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I was thinking exactly what Dean Roberts said about universally designed classrooms.
Thank you.
And that does sort of open it up, and it in a way negates the accommodation requirement, because then it's saying, hey, we're going to do this for everybody, and we're going to like level the playing field in this particular way. And I do think putting it down on a syllabus is definitely a way to just have that door open right up.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yes. Oh, can you wait for the mic, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I came late. How does being ADHD help your support system in dealing with? I mean, one could argue living in urban stress communities, as which we are in, that we're all a little bit neurodivergent. How does your situation, being ADHD, help your support systems, evocate and communicate that to the rest of the community? How do we all deal with that, your situation? What are the symptoms? How are the signs? How do we know? How do we gather information so we can help others? Because I think personally, being in these environments, we're all a little bit neurodivergent. We're all a bit under a little stress. So that you being who you are and being out front about it, how does that help the rest of us deal with what we're dealing with?
I think that's a great question. I think I would disagree that we're not all ADHD, because ADHD is a disability. It's disabling. So that's what it takes it from like everyday stress or anxiety to a level where it really impacts my life in a real way where I'm technically disabled, right? That's like the designation. And so, yes, we all have like these stresses and anxiety, especially like you said, living in an urban environment. But when it becomes to the point where I can't do my daily things like eating, like very things that are like necessary for my survival, that's when it becomes a disability to me. I think being open about it, and I'll pass it off to panelists as well, is being open about it does allow for the normalization of the stress and anxiety, and being able to say, I'm feeling stressed, I'm feeling anxious. How do we work on lowering that? And sharing tools with community folks to be able to really engage in how do we lower the stress and anxiety of living in a very urban, kind of fast-paced environment, while also understanding that folks who are neurodivergent get it to a point where we can't function in a way that other folks who don't have ADHD would still be able to.
I guess I would just add to it. I mean, I think it's a really good question, and maybe it also kind of speaks to Dean Roberts' point on or asking about kind of what faculty can do. How do they even know that someone is neurodivergent when I think that there is something valid to saying with the technology, with living in the city. Yes, it's true. Focus is so in many different places, and I think that's also what makes this topic really difficult, because I think faculty who maybe aren't neurodivergent themselves, they don't have that lived experience. I don't know that they really know or they can truly appreciate what is kind of going on in the heads of students who are neurodivergent. And so even if they, accept the accommodation request, even if they're aware that the student has ADHD, that doesn't necessarily mean that they get it, and that their response to a request for accommodation is really going to that they're not going to respond in a way that they think is fine, but actually like really impacted the way that other student that student is going to then move forward accepting the accommodations, if that makes sense. So I think maybe trying to provide more of the personal stories to faculty, and like helping to like ensure that there's at least a little bit more understanding, awareness, and they can, maybe also having them like it could help at the beginning of the semester for faculty to like have a little like a small just survey, or accept students to share what are some things that I should know about your like the way that you learn, and ways that I could help you, like something very simple. Because I think the way that faculty ask for feedback on the way that the course is going, it isn't necessarily structured in a way that like this type of feedback on challenges you're having as someone who's neurodivergent, it's not necessarily going to get communicated through that kind of survey.
Yeah, interesting. We're at time, but I do want to give our online folks a chance to ask hopefully a quick question. So Ingrid, are there any quick questions? No.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So first question was, do you have a resource list of books for ADHD and ADD students?
So I'm going to email everybody who registered with a list of panelist suggested books and other apps and things. And then we have 2 books here that are on that list for people to take with them. So yes, that was an easy one. That was a quick one.
And I think the other one is, how can faculty implement different methods or ways of teaching to engage folks with ADHD?
Sally or Bree, you want to, I guess, kind of go on?
Do you want to go first?
I don't know if she wanted to share.
No, go ahead, Bree.
I'm thinking about the power of your facilitation plans and your pedagogical approach to your classes and all, as well as your class sessions. You can create a class and space that can support all students with a wide range of learning styles, even beyond what we're talking about ADHD, but all learning styles. What is your structure? How does that support learning in your environment? And what are you trying to cultivate in your classroom? Do you implement just PowerPoint? Do you implement reflective writing? Do you allow, is it just you speaking to students? If so, that might not be the most effective pedagogical approach. So that's one thing I've gotten support in as an advisor of how to do that better. And I've seen the power of that in my classroom. And I'm not sure about your school, but at the Grad Center, there are great resources for instructors learning to improve that skill set. And there are classes that are available to do so. And I think as a student on the other end and an ADHDer, that makes a real difference, a profound impact on my educational experience.
I just want to jump in and add that we have created an instructor checklist that asks a bunch of questions that instructors can ask of themselves before they start the semester, of creating a more inclusive environment. I think that's the biggest takeaway, is you don't necessarily need to know if you have a student with ADHD in your classroom or any other form of neurodivergence. If you're creating an inclusive and welcoming environment, you shouldn't need to know. And if students still choose to share additional information or more individualized information, we should create an environment in which they're welcome to do so, and we should use that information in a way that supports them better. But the takeaway, I think, is to create a welcoming, inclusive environment that meets the needs of all students. And I'd be happy to share that checklist, that instructor checklist for creating inclusive environment. And I would love feedback on it if anybody has that. So we can get that to you if you would like that.
Fantastic. I think we're going to have to end there because we are over time. But thank you all. I have a long list of thank yous. Thank you, Dean Roberts. Thank you, panelists, so much for your time and energy and information and sharing. It's been really a wonderful conversation. And thank you. Really, I can't thank you enough. But thank you, James. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you, Michelle, who has left the building. Thank you, Don. And really, thank you all for coming.